An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. That's how we remember ancient law. But the oldest legal code ever discovered says otherwise. In the kingdom of Ur, around 2100 BC, King Ur-Nammu did not punish most crimes with mutilation. He fined them. Break a man's bone, pay silver. Knock out a tooth, pay compensation. Cause injury, pay damages. This was the law that governed civilization 4,000 years ago.
Spears like forests on the plain. Clay-tongued tablets.
There is a tablet in a museum in Philadelphia. It is cracked, damaged, written in a language no one spoke for 2,000 years, and for a long time, scholars couldn't agree on what the most important part of it actually said. What they do agree on, what the evidence makes unambiguous, is this. Somewhere around 2094 BC, the most powerful king in the world died on a battlefield. He had unified an entire civilization. He had defeated an empire. He had written the oldest surviving law code in human history. And at the end, his army left him there. We don't know where the battle was. We don't know who won. We don't even know with certainty who he was fighting. His name was Ur-Nammu. He ruled for 18 years, and everything you're about to see, the laws, the temples, the empire, was built on the back of wars that history has almost entirely forgotten. This is the story of those wars. Imagine you are standing in southern Mesopotamia in 2120 BC, the empire that organized your world, the Akkadian Empire, the first true empire in human history, has been gone for 40 years, and the 40 years since its collapse have been a disaster. The roads are no longer maintained, the standardized weights no longer exist. The irrigation canals that fed millions of people require coordinated labor across dozens of city-states, and there is no longer any authority to coordinate them. Grass, as a Sumerian inscription puts it, with devastating simplicity, grew high on the highways of the land. The scribes who compiled the king list hit this period, and the language breaks down. Their verdict on the decades after the last Akkadian king reads as three words that have haunted historians ever since. Who was king? Who was not king? Into this vacuum moved the Gutians, mountain people from the Zagros highlands. The Sumerian tradition hated them, with a thoroughness that is itself historically revealing. They are called people unaware of how to revere the gods, ignorant of the right religious practices. That is propaganda, written by people who had a civilizational stake in portraying their conquerors as savages. But underneath the propaganda is something real. Every system that made lowland Mesopotamian civilization function had been disrupted. Then came Utu-Hegal of Uruk. He hunted the last Gutian king across the countryside, captured him, dragged him back in triumph. The Gutian dominance over Sumer was over, and then Utu-Hegal died. The sources say the river carried off his corpse, possibly drowned during the construction of a dam. The man who liberated Sumer was gone, and the throne was suddenly catastrophically empty. Ur-Nammu had been watching. He had been Utu-Hegal's governor in the city of Ur. He had a base of power, a professional administration. The Sumerian king list records what happened next, with 6 words that contain an entire revolution. Uruk was defeated, and the kingship was taken to Ur. Before we follow Ur-Nammu into battle, you need to understand what he was fighting with, because the army that built the Ur-3 Empire was not a levy of farmers turned soldiers. It was a professional military machine, and we know this with unusual precision. not from monuments or boastful inscriptions, but from the most mundane sources imaginable, administrative tablets. Tens of thousands of clay tablets survive from the Ur III period, among them military supply records that document individual soldiers, their daily rations, their equipment, their movements between garrison cities. This is not the stuff of epic poetry. This is logistics, and logistics is how empires actually function. The Ur-Nammu stela, now in fragments at the Penn Museum, gives us our best visual evidence for how this king understood power. It was once a massive limestone monument, approximately 3 meters high. It had been deliberately smashed, probably when the Elamites sacked the city in 2004 BC, and recovered in 106 fragments. Here is something interesting. The stela does not show battle scenes, no piles of enemy dead, no prisoners with ropes around their necks, imagery that is utterly standard for warrior kings of this period. Ur-Nammu chose a different image. He had himself depicted as a builder, a temple restorer, a man of law and divine commission. His wars were thoroughly documented. But his public monuments emphasized something else: legitimate authority, order restored. The gap between how these wars were fought and how they were presented to the population is itself one of the most interesting things about Ur-Nammu's reign. If you wanted to rule Mesopotamia, you could not leave Lagash alone. This was not a matter of political ambition, it was geography. Lagash sat at the junction of the canal networks that fed the agricultural heartland of southern Sumer. Control those canals, and you control the food supply for the entire region. Beyond the geography, there was history. Lagash was the most consistently independent military power in Sumer. Its rulers had fought the famous border war with Umma. They had maneuvered through the Akkadian period without losing their identity. These were not people who would simply accept absorption into someone else's empire. Ur-Nammu attacked. Royal inscriptions confirm that he defeated Lagash's forces and killed or captured its ruler, a man named Nam-Mani. What happened next tells you everything about how this empire was built. Within weeks of the military victory, Ur-Nammu's architects arrived. Temple construction began. Foundation pegs bearing the king's name were driven into the ground. Bricks stamped with his cuneiform inscription began appearing at building sites across the city. The message to the population was not subtle. The gods have transferred their favor. Your new king builds for them. Your old king is gone. Following Lagash, Ur-Nammu moved through the major cities of southern Mesopotamia with a consistency that suggests not improvisation, but a plan. But the campaign that mattered most was not a military one. It was a coronation. Nippur had no army worth mentioning. It controlled no strategic canal junction. What it had was the Ekur, the temple of Enlil, king of the gods. Every ruler who wanted to call himself king of Sumer and Akkad, the legitimate ruler of the entire civilizational tradition, needed Nippur's endorsement. Without it, you were a warlord with territory. With it, you were a king with divine mandate. Ur-Nammu traveled to Nippur. The ceremony was performed, and then immediately the construction crews arrived. He rebuilt the Ekur. Every brick laid at Nippur was a statement to every priest, every merchant, every farmer in the land. This man has the gods' approval. His authority is not just military, it is cosmic. While Ur-Nammu was consolidating the south, there was a man to the northeast who had no intention of accepting the new order. His name was Kutik in Shushinak. king of Elam, the highland civilization to the east. And in the power vacuum following the Akkadian collapse, he had been busy, very busy. Kutik in Shushinak had seized the city of Akkad, the former capital of the greatest empire in history. He had conquered Eshnunna, one of the most strategically important cities in the region. He had taken Tutub, controlling the Diyala Valley passes into the Zagros. He called himself, in his inscriptions, the ruler who had brought Elam and Akkad under a single authority. He was, in other words, building exactly the same thing Ur-Nammu was building. From the opposite direction, Ur-Nammu moved against him. The royal inscriptions record a campaign against the coalition Kutik in Shushinak of Elam, the city of Tutub and Eshnunna. This was not a border skirmish. Ur-Nammu won. Kutik in Shushinak disappears from the historical record after this defeat. The Susa king list, a cuneiform tablet at the Louvre listing the rulers of the Awan dynasty of Elam, ends with him. He is number 12. There is no number 13. His dynasty died with his defeat. An empire is not just armies. It is also the things armies protect. Every year of Ur-Nammu's reign was given a name, not a number, a name, a description of the most significant event of that year, inscribed on every official document dated to that year. Contracts, temple records, military supply lists, tax receipts. This means that for every tablet from Ur-Nammu's reign, the year is identified by its defining event. It is an accidentally preserved chronicle. Every scribe in every city in the empire, writing every document, writing the year name, recording without intending to the king's priorities. Among the year names, a single phrase, worth pausing on. The devastation of Gutium. This year name reveals something. The narrative sources leave ambiguous. The Gutian expulsion was not finished. Gutian groups remained active in the northeastern highlands throughout the early Ur III period, raiding, resisting, refusing to accept that their era was over. Ur-Nammu spent years suppressing them, year after year, while building temples and digging canals and writing law codes. He was simultaneously conducting military operations against mountain fighters who knew the terrain and had nothing left to lose. The empire was being built, not through a single triumphant sequence of conquests, but through continuous, grinding military pressure across multiple frontiers at once. We need to be honest with you about what we know and what we don't. The primary source for Ur-Nammu's death is a Sumerian composition called simply The Death of Ur-Nammu. It survives on approximately 9 damaged tablets and fragments, now scattered across multiple museum collections. Here is what the text actually says, and what it doesn't. The composition is a literary lament. Its language is metaphoric. It describes evil coming upon Ur. It describes the king passing away, at the most crucial passage, the one that would tell us exactly how he died. The tablets are damaged. The text is broken, precisely where it matters most. What scholars have reconstructed points toward battle. The imagery is of a soldier who fell in the field, a king abandoned on the ground like a broken pitcher. But the description is damaged, vague and metaphoric. What the independent sources confirm, without ambiguity, is this: Ur-Nammu did not die in his palace. His son, Shulgi, who would go on to rule for 48 years, conspicuously avoided using his father's lineage as a source of legitimacy. Scholars have interpreted this as reflecting something problematic about how Ur-Nammu's reign ended. Ur-Nammu was also not deified after his death. For a powerful Mesopotamian king of this period, non-deification was almost a statement, consistent with a death understood at the time as a failure rather than a glorious conclusion. The enemy is never named. The battlefield is never named. What we know is the result. The king who built the world's first surviving law code died in the field. His body was left there, and the empire he had spent 18 years constructing, through military genius, administrative innovation, and sheer relentless will, outlasted him by a century. In 18 years, Ur-Nammu transformed a fragmented post-imperial landscape into the most administratively sophisticated state that Mesopotamia had ever produced. The Ur-III period is the best documented era in all of ancient Mesopotamian history, not the best known, the most documented. Tens of thousands of clay tablets recording everything: daily soldier rations, livestock movements, temple income, judicial decisions. None of this existed before Ur-Nammu's campaigns. You cannot build a centralized administrative system without first controlling the cities where the archives are kept. You cannot standardize weights and legal procedures without first establishing that your authority is real and enforced. The administration was the military achievement, expressed in clay. And then there is the law code. The code of Ur-Nammu is the oldest surviving law code in the world. It predates the code of Hammurabi, the one most people have heard of, by approximately 3 centuries. Its prologue states that Ur-Nammu established justice and put order in the land. That phrase deserves to be held up and examined. Put order in the land. He had taken a landscape where the highways had grass growing across them, where the weights were not standardized, where cities operated in isolation and fear. And he had put order in it, with armies, with campaigns, with the organized professional military machine. We have spent this video watching him deploy. The law was the culmination of the violence. You cannot write a law code. For people you do not govern. You cannot govern people. You have not first compelled to accept your authority. But what Ur-Nammu built could not protect him. He died in battle. His son completed the Great Ziggurat his father had commissioned. He expanded the empire his father had built. The empire lasted another century after Ur-Nammu's death, before the Elamites destroyed it in approximately 2004 BCE. The last king was carried off to Elam in chains. The Ziggurat of Ur still stands in the Iraqi desert. 4,100 years after Ur-Nammu commissioned its construction, the structure rises from the flat plain, visible for miles as it was in his time. He did not live to see it completed, but it is still there. History remembers Ur-Nammu for his law code, for his ziggurat, for the administrative achievement of the Ur-III state. It does not generally remember his wars, but the laws existed because the wars happened. The ziggurat was built because the campaigns were won. He called himself the trustworthy shepherd, a man of peace, of justice, of divine service. It is an interesting choice of self-description for a man who spent 18 years on campaign. Shepherds protect their flocks. They face predators. They do not always survive the encounter. Ur-Nammu built the world's first surviving law code. He built the most enduring structure in the ancient Near East. He created an administrative state so sophisticated that its records are still being studied in academic journals today, 4,000 years after the clay was fired, and he died on a battlefield, probably in the northeastern highlands, probably against enemies who had already been declared defeated. His body was left in the field. His army came home without him. The empire he created outlasted him by a century. The ziggurat he commissioned outlasted the empire by 4 millennia. And the tablets, the law code, the year names, the fragmentary lament are still teaching us things. That is the measure of what his wars built. But nothing lasts forever, not even what he built. 100 years after Ur-Nammu, the empire is dissolving, province by province, city by city. The last king will write desperate letters to governors who no longer answer. The goddess will abandon her own city, and someone will sit down and write a poem about the end of the world. Next, the fall of the Ur Third Dynasty. If you want to be there when it drops, subscribe, hit the bell. And if this video gave you something, the like button is how you tell the algorithm that history like this deserves to be seen. See you in the next one.